Well then, actually doing a cartoon review again. Yeah, recently I had a bit of trouble to find the time to work on videos, but you don't think that I would miss out the opportunity to talk about the DuckTales finale, did ya? So, the series finale of DuckTales, appropriately named The Last Adventure. The epic clash between f.o.w.l and the Duck family finally reaches its climax. So, is it any good? Well, it's DuckTales. It's decent. So while celebrating Webby's birthday, the Duck family raids the f.o.w.l headquarters under Fanzo's Fun Zone. However, they are detected right away, causing the leadership of f.o.w.l to simply evacuate and initiate a self-destruct sequence. Our heroes barely manage to stop it, but they are unable to secure any useful information or capture any of the villains. However, they do find May and June, clones of Webby. No one wants to trust them, cause they might be f.o.w.l agents, except for Webby, who is of course curious about her new sisters. Too bad that everyone was right to be suspicious, as they are indeed evil. They steal the sword of Swanson and the blessed bagpipes of Clan McDuck, kidnap Webby, and also Huey sneaks onto their plane. They bring them to the Great Library of Alexandria. However, in actuality, Webby managed to pull a twin switcheroo and pretended to be June, while June has been presented to f.o.w.l as Webby. Of course, the rest of the Duck family gathers some allies to rescue Webby and Huey. Huey in the meantime learns that the leader of f.o.w.l, Bradford Buzzard, is actually the grandchild of Isabella Finch, and he tries to win him for his cause, as they are both woodchucks. The rescue doesn't quite go as planned. Turns out that Webby is actually a clone of Scrooge, created so Bradford can get his hands on the papyrus of binding, which, as established in the first adventure, can only be found by Scrooge's rightful heir. After he gets his hands on it, he uses it to create a magical contract that would force Scrooge to never adventure again, but it would let him leave with his family in peace. Also, Bradford wants to rid the world in itself of adventure by throwing every magical/outlandish thing he can find through a modified version of the dimension portal from Let's Get Dangerous, which, instead of sending things to different dimensions, erases them from existence now. Anyhow, the contract is null and void because family is the greatest adventure of all, so the contract contradicts itself as it promises that Scrooge can live in peace with his family. Not sure if this would hold up in court, but okay. Let's roll with it. Bradford is defeated and transformed into a normal mindless buzzard by Magica, and the Duck family drop out the Sun Chaser because of Launchpad being Launchpad, while the credits roll. Well, that's the episode in a nutshell. I think we have quite a few things to unpack here. Perhaps the biggest reveal is of course that Webby is actually a clone of Scrooge. That was certainly an interesting reveal, making her more or less his daughter. I think it somewhat undercuts the previous established message that family isn't about blood relation, but then again it does somewhat reinforce the idea at the same time as Webby still sees Beakley as a family. Also, random question, how did Beakley find the Library of Alexandria? Duck family found it because they were able to track down Huey, but she didn't even know that Huey and Webby were kidnapped. Anyway, the whole thing also opens up the question why f.o.w.l didn't try to get Webby sooner. I mean, Beakley did bring Webby to Scrooge to protect her and keep her secret, sure, but it's unlikely that f.o.w.l wasn't aware of it, considering that Bradford had Scrooge under surveillance the entire time, and as a former high-ranking employee of Shush, he surely would have been aware of Beakley. Besides that, the logic of using a clone to get the papyrus of binding is a bit sketchy to begin with.
Wait, what are you writing? No writing!
Papyrus, I ask that you be lost once more until the rightful heir of Scrooge McDuck can find your final resting place. If you hurt my niece and nephew, no one will find the papyrus again.
No! Oh!
The phrasing was rightful heir, but would a clone of Scrooge be considered his rightful heir? Especially when he isn't aware that Webby is his clone? In particular, when he wrote it, he did it to protect Della Donald, so wouldn't they be his rightful heir? Or the triplets, for the matter? Or could have any of them find the papyrus? Well, probably not, because Bradford could have easily used Huey for that, if that was the case. And if it was just about genetics, May and June would have done the trick as well. Or another clone. But for this plot to work, rightful heir seems to mean that only his firstborn clone was needed. Lucky for Bradford that it never quite worked between Scrooge and Goldie, I suppose. Speaking of May and June, maybe you know it, maybe you don't, but April, May and June were created as distaff counterparts for Huey, Dewey and Louie, with them being the nieces of Daisy. They are in the end rather obscure characters as they only rarely appeared in the comics, and the most prominent appearance they got was a cameo in an episode of House of Mouse, until The Legend of the Three Caballeros came along, in which they are major supporting characters. If you haven't already checked it out, it's on Disney Plus, and it's a great show, and I really hope that it gets a second season. Now, I don't see much of a point in comparing the portrayal of April, May and June in The Legend of the Three Caballeros with the portrayal in DuckTales, as they are completely different characters that just share the same names, ignoring the fact that April is, well, Webby. But I do think that their inclusion would have been a bit of a bigger deal if Legend of the Three Caballeros didn't beat DuckTales to the punch in that regard. You know, it simply isn't as much of a novelty at this point. Of course, this is only the case if you are even aware of The Legend of the Three Caballeros, as the show clearly isn't as popular as it should be. Anyhow, I suppose it's safe to assume that May and June were created sometime after the events of the Sword of Constantine, as Black Heron acquired a feather there. The episode never really elaborates whose feather it is, but this is the only really logical conclusion. They seemingly are rather attached to Black Heron as their mother, but they really just gloss over their trauma when Donald suggested Daisy could adopt them.
Now that Heron's gone, where do we belong? We belong right here.
Hey Daisy, you know that adventure we're gonna take? How about the top of that stairways?
Which seems like a bit of an odd suggestion when you think about it. Hey honey, I have here some evil clones of the opposite sex clone of my uncle. Do you want to adopt them? I know it's a shout out to the fact that they are Daisy's nieces in the comics, but it seems like a rather weird request. It would make far more sense if Beakley were to take them in, as she did with Webby, if anything. You know what would have fixed that? If Daisy had tagged along and interacted with them beforehand, maybe convincing them to turn on Black Heron and then offering to take them in afterwards. Yeah, now I look at this tweet from the showrunner and think to myself, this is exactly what happened. Daisy got an episode where they establish her as a character. Then she shows up 2 more times where her character boils down to being Donald's girlfriend. Now, considering how many characters play an active role in the last adventure, it might have been rather hard to give her an expanded role even if the finale was a 3-parter, and I'm also sure that they had more plans for Daisy that were cut short when the show wasn't renewed for a 4th season. It's just a little bit jarring how it played out in the end. Also, speaking of Donald, basically the same criticism I brought up in my videos on the Season 1 and Season 2 finale still apply. Donald just feels criminally underutilized and hardly contributes anything in the end. I think it's almost poetic that Bradford was trying to erase him from existence, because frankly it wouldn't make that much of a difference considering how irrelevant he sort of feels to the show. Which is kinda jarring considering that there was quite a bit of potential there. There are some parallels between him and Bradford. Donald uses Wish and Quack Pack to go all Wonder Vision on his family so they can live a quote-unquote normal life together. He doesn't like all these crazy adventures like Bradford does. Donald and Bradford should have interacted a bit more. Highlight those parallels. Have Bradford tempt Donald instead of Huey to achieve his goal. Oh yeah, speaking of Huey, yeah, he is still rather underdeveloped by the end of the show. Like the scene where Bradford tries to get Huey to cooperate, tries to give him a bit more development, but in the end it doesn't really achieve anything but to elaborate on Bradford's motives. The first season mainly focused on Dewey, the second season on Louie, and the third season was kinda supposed to focus on Huey, and it seemed like that at first. He did better, but it still kinda fell short in the end, with his development being either overshadowed by other characters in the same episode or the overarching conflict with f.o.w.l and the hunt for the missing mysteries. In particular, here in the finale, he was in the end overshadowed by Webby, who sort of came out as the true protagonist of DuckTales, with the reveal that she is Scrooge's quote-unquote doctor. Dewey, Louie, Della, Gosselin, Violet and Lena were also here, and while they got adequate screen time and were allowed to show off their abilities, they didn't serve that much of a narrative purpose other than being extra muscle. Of course, one big highlight was the reveal of Manly, the man-horse's true identity, being the horse of the apocalypse, and a shout out to Gargoyles.
I swore I would never do this again. Hold this for me. Again.
They played the Gargoyle theme, and he is even voiced by Keith David, who also voiced Goliath, which certainly is rather neat, but considering that he doesn't actually do anything, it's just a bit of fluff. It's one of the things where I say, that was cool and all, but this might have worked better as its own episode. Boyd is another case where I'm not sure if it was really necessary for him to be in this episode. It's rather noticeable that he was immediately reduced to being a hat, which prevented him from actually using his abilities. Felt a little bit like a contrived way to have him in the episode without him steamrolling the place, as this Astro Boy ripoff is pretty strong. The part where he hacked the Gizmoduck suit could have easily been accomplished in some other fashion, but it was an okay way to handle it. Well, Gizmoduck and Darkwing certainly had a more important role to play, besides being some of the most prominent essence of the Duck family in the final battle and fighting Steelbeak, which is rather fitting as Steelbeak is primarily known as Darkwing Duck villain after all, but didn't actually get to fight him until now, well, at least not on screen. They were mostly there for launchpad character development and to bicker with each other. The rivalry between the two just never gets old, and I do rather like the angle that Darkwing actually considers Fenton a good friend, but is completely oblivious that he is also Gizmoduck. But yeah, they are mostly here for Launchpad, who got a bit of the short stick in DuckTales. Ever since Stellar returned, he isn't even really the pilot of the Duck family anymore, and I think it's a crime that he wasn't involved in the Tailspin episode. So basically, all he had going for him at this point is being a fanboy for Gizmo Darkwing Duck, and trying his best to be their sidekick. Him getting access to the Gyroduck suit and takes the spotlight as a hero for a short moment, therefore does come with a certain amount of catharsis. So I think that was handled rather well. And talking of Steelbeak, he was rather well utilized here as well. Frankly, I wasn't a big fan of him being dumb muscles when he's supposed to be the scheming James Bond type villain. This episode clearly tried to fix that by him using the IntelliRay on himself. He actually becomes a force to be reckoned with as a result. Now we can't be sure if he retained his intelligence after the IntelliRay was broken, but I would presume yes. If DuckTales had been renewed for a 4th season, I'm pretty sure that the idea was that Steelbeak would take over the remains of f.o.w.l. now that Bradford and Black Horan are out of the picture. And with him being a genius now, that would have put him in line with his classic portrayal in Darkwing Duck. And now let's talk about the other villains of f.o.w.l. With the reveal what Bradford's goals are, it makes a surprising amount of sense that Phantom Blood is part of the organization. He is like the only one who has goals that completely overlap with those of Bradford, as he wants to rid the world of magic. While he certainly is a departure from the Phantom Blood that appears in Mickey Mouse comics, he's easily the best realized villain of f.o.w.l, having some well-defined motives and some character development thanks to his growing relationship with Pepper, which feels cut short a bit. I'm pretty sure that he would have become an independent villain if the show had continued. Rocker Duck on the other hand, I just don't quite get why he hangs around f.o.w.l. He throws himself way before f.o.w.l was even a thing, and sort of lacks any reason to work with them, besides acquiring some water from the Fountain of Youth. His role could have been filled by pretty much anyone, especially since he is mostly relevant because of Jeeves being big muscle. He doesn't even really have any particular beef with Scrooge. Scrooge fought like one of his plans once in the Old West, and he was more annoyed than anything else.
Well, dang.
Now I overall like Rocket Duck in the show, but out of all the f.o.w.l villains, he is probably the weakest. Well, that being said, I don't have that much to say about Black Heron. Her role as a clone's mother only gets a bit of lip service when they are sad that she is gone. She's mostly defined by being evil for evil's sake, and you know what? That works. She's entertaining. The most interesting aspect of her character is probably that she always tried to push Bradford to become more villainous, to a point that she was actually proud of him when he erased her out of existence. There's a point to be made that Bradford never would have gone that far as he did if it wasn't for her influence, which is somewhat fascinating. If this wasn't a serious villain, I would think that killing her off is a bit of a waste, since it would have certainly been interesting to explore her relationship with Webby, May and June, but since the show is over, she had a role and she played it well. And she went out with a smile, knowing that Bradford finally became the villain she always wanted him to be. And then there's of course Bradford himself, well, and his clones. I actually started wondering whatever happened with the board of directors since they just kinda disappeared, but this episode finally addressed that by revealing that they were literally just yes-man clones of Bradford. An interesting choice, but it works. It streamlines the hierarchy of f.o.w.l. There are already a lot of characters involved as it is, so cutting these two out of the equation is rather effective, and it fits Bradford as he likes being in control. Bradford is of course the opposite of Heron. He doesn't see himself as a villain. He thinks he makes the world a better place, and even reveals his motivation. His grandma dragged him along on adventures and he didn't like that. Yeah, that's it. Okay, chances are that he was traumatized by the constant danger he was exposed to, and yeah, Isabella Finch certainly isn't a great parental figure for sure, but it's a bit hard to justify his action with that. And I think that's sort of the point. Brantford tries to present himself as a well-intentioned man and denies that he is a supervillain, yet he surrounds himself with people that are obviously evil and even say as much themselves. He tries to quote-unquote negotiate with Scrooge when he's actually more of a blackmailer, not to mention that his plan in the end is unnecessarily convoluted. First of all, why go through all this trouble with the dimensional portal to erase adventure from existence when he already had access to a fine genie? Like, Jean's presence in this episode hurts more than it adds, cause it brings up the question why f.o.w.l didn't just use him to achieve their goals instead of having Blood using him as a battery. This would be fine if the Duck family had wished him free, but as far as we know, he still has to grant the wishes of whoever gets their hands on his lamb. So basically, f.o.w.l sort of best on an instant win condition here. Also brings up the question why Jean just went away after being freed from Blood's gauntlets. Like, he could have helped a bit. The best reason why Brantford didn't just use Jean is the same reason why he didn't just erase Scrooge from existence, I guess.
My family will.
Oh, you mean this family? Wave hello, everyone. Hi, Mommy!
Each of them will soon be erased from existence as well. All except you. Even if I tossed you in, you'd find a way back. You always do. You're Scrooge McDuck.
And even then, just assuming that Scrooge can do the impossible, I don't quite buy it. I think the actual reason is that he wanted to gloat. He wanted to force Scrooge to sign away his life. Despite all his claims, Brantford is just a bad person, which is probably exemplified by him throwing Donald into the portal to be erased after he already got from Scrooge what he wanted.
Normally I wouldn't indulge in petty villainy, but since this is a special occasion... Ow!
Also, hold on a minute, as far as I understood it, Scrooge being allowed to live in peace with his family was a condition of the contract, so didn't he just broke it himself, making it null and void even without the flimsy "family is the greatest adventure of all" loophole? I'm okay with that one, by the way. It's rather cheesy, but it is in line for what I would expect from DuckTales, as it's all about family. But yeah, back to Brantford, this proves that he was never as noble as he claimed to be, and you know what, I'm on board with that. Something I actually rather enjoyed about DuckTales is that all the villains are unapologetic evil. It feels like most cartoons nowadays are trying way too hard to present their villains as tragic and complex. Something bad happened to them that one time, and so you're supposed to feel sorry for the villain, and then they get a redemption way too often, and everyone just kind of forgets that they were ever evil, and it often comes with a lot of unfortunate implications. But maybe I'm just damaged from watching too much My Little Pony and Steven Universe, and don't let me get started on Ben Solo. In either case, Brantford always seems like an answer to this kind of villains. Brantford has a tragic backstory that is the reason for his actions. He has noble goals, but in the end of the day his backstory doesn't really justify anything, and he commits atrocity after atrocity, all the while claiming that he isn't a villain, despite all the evidence to the contrary. In fact, this actually mirrors the episode that came just before this one. The life and crimes of Scrooge McDuck was all about Marbeagle, Glomgold and Magica trying to prove that Scrooge turned them into the villains they are, and all of it was bogus. Sure, they were affected by Scrooge's actions, but even without his intervention, they would have turned out to be bad people. This can be applied to Brantford as well. Sure, it wasn't great that his grandma forced him to go on adventures, but this doesn't excuse any of Brantford's actions. And then we get this.
Please, no! I'm not a villain!
No, you certainly are not.
Yeah, the disgust Magica has for Brantford captures it perfectly. Magica, Glomgold and Marbeagle don't pretend to be something they are not. Well, unless they are trying to get Scrooge punched by a karmic court, of course. They don't acknowledge Brantford as a proper villain. They consider him a farce, a bad joke. And then Magica turns him into a normal buzzard, essentially asserting a dominance as a true villain compared to him. Now, is Brantford's portrayal actual meta-commentary on modern cartoon villains? Maybe. Maybe I'm also just reading too much into this. Anyhow, there are still a few minor things. For one, it just kind of feels like Gendra should have played a bigger role, and that her storyline with Fenton in general could have needed a bit more focus. And while I kinda like that Ludwig van Drake is still alive, it also feels a little bit pointless. It's, again, one of these things that probably would have been more meaningful if DuckTales had received a 4th season. Like McDuck, who got his big introduction in season 2 only for not showing up afterwards. But I think we are more or less done here, so let's wrap things up. The Last Adventure is overall a pretty great season finale and a decent series finale. For the most part, it manages to tie up most loose ends. Sorta. It does have the baggage to carry that it is rather evident that the showrunners obviously were hoping for another season or 2. We never got the Negaduck payoff, the whole Darkwing Duck business in general only really took off in Let's Get Dangerous for the matter. Magica got her magic back this season, but she didn't get any opportunity to use it. Steelbeak, Phantom Blood and Rocket Duck seemingly got away and are surely already coming up with new schemes and so on. It does feel like the adventure continues, which is not bad, considering that the goal of Bradford was to rid the world of adventure. It would have feel rather odd if there was a sense of finality present that makes us feel that there won't be any more adventures, but I think it highlights the general problem with DuckTales. I think DuckTales is without a question a great cartoon, but I think it was a little bit too ambitious at points. The show just kept on introducing new elements but neglected to develop already present ones in the process, and much of the stuff they introduced felt like it's supposed to be recurring stuff that never got any payoff. Like for example, I can't be the only one who is a bit bummed out that we finally got to meet Kit and Molly after they had been teasing Cups to that since episode 1, but then they only got 1 episode, right? As a result, the show felt a bit overcrowded at times. It seems like the show was written with the mindset, yeah, we gotta elaborate on this in future seasons, only to be cut short in the end. In either case, I think The Last Adventure was as good of a series finale the show could have hoped for it, and it certainly didn't disappoint. The only disappointing thing here is that we won't get any more. But what about you? Did you like this episode? Anything that bothered you? What do you guys think about DuckTales in general? Let me know in the comments below. I am Tricky Fox. Stay foxy.
Sly as a fox, you got me under your spell. But you know I'll never tell that I know you know so well.